In this video, I'm gonna show you the steps it takes to make your own 3D printed Mandalorian helmet. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you know that I make most of my builds out of EVA foam, but I wanted to do something a bit different this time. This isn't the first time I make something 3D printed, but I'm definitely not a pro, so you'll see some of the mistakes I made and the solutions to fix them. If you don't have a 3D printer but still want a Mando helmet, you can make your own out of EVA foam using my templates, which you can find on my Etsy store. The link is in the description below. Alright, let's make this thing. The first thing I did was to look for a good 3D model of Din Djarin's helmet. I chose this one from Dio3D because the ear modules and back vent are separate parts which I could print vertically. At the time of making this video, the file is $30 instead of $50. I printed all the parts on my Creality CR10 V3, which is an old printer but still works well. I wanted to print the helmet in two parts, but the bottom half stopped printing for some reason, so I had to print the rest of the helmet separately. The helmet wasn't perfect because it was my first time using Polytera PLA filament, so there will be some cleanup to do. I started by going over the parts with my heat gun to get rid of the plastic hairs that stick out of the prints. Then I started sanding. The goal with this pass of sanding is to remove almost all of the imperfections and layer lines to give the filler primer we'll use later a better chance. Using a palm sander for the bigger areas will make the process faster. Before gluing everything together, I recommend sanding the edges of the parts against a piece of sandpaper glued to something rigid and flat. This will reduce the gaps between the parts. I applied super glue on the edges of the parts and simply pressed the other parts in place, aligning them as best as I could. Unfortunately, my prints warped a lot in some spots, so we'll have to fill that with something. I decided to try plastic welding. You simply take a soldering iron, some PLA filament, and you push the filament in the gaps to make them disappear. Make sure you wear a respirator as you don't want to breathe in the fumes. This is a time-consuming step, which is why it's better to have a clean print right off the printer. I'm far from the best at 3D printing, so I have to resort to salvaging my projects like this. Plastic welding will make your parts super secured, much more than using super glue. With all the gaps properly filled, it's time to sand down the layer lines to make the helmet as smooth as possible before adding any primer. Once again, the palm sander is a real time saver and can give really nice results. Make sure you follow the same steps for the ear modules and back vent. It's finally time for priming. I like to use this Duplicolor filler primer. I found that the red version sands better than the gray version, but both work well. After spraying 2 thick coats on all the parts, it's time for more sanding. This time I did it by hand to be more specific and gradual with my sanding. You don't want to remove all the primer, only the high spots that aren't smooth. To fill in the remaining imperfections, I like to use wood filler as it's not as toxic as Bondo or other automotive fillers. The cool thing is you can make it smoother with water right after applying it, which cuts down on sanding. After 2 coats of filler and a day for each coat to dry, I used a sanding sponge to remove the excess. With that done on all the parts, I decided to do another round of filler primer, sanding, filling, and more sanding to make the helmet as good as I could. Feel free to do as many passes as you want with your project, but it doesn't need to be perfect to look good in the end. With that done, I decided to glue the ear modules and back vent to the helmet. You can clamp the parts while the glue dries, but protect them with something soft like foam. The helmet looks really good. To make it uniform for the first layer of paint, let's add a final light coat of filler primer over the whole thing. I'll make the helmet shiny using graphite powder, so as a base coat for that, I'll apply matte gray paint followed by a good coat of glossy clear coat. 3 hours after applying the clear coat, it's time for the graphite. You'll need a bunch of cotton balls to rub the powder in the paint without scratching it. For the best results, go over the whole helmet with graphite twice, then wait a couple of hours and buff the helmet with a clean cotton ball. After that, the helmet looks pretty good. I painted the inside with black acrylic paint to cover up the sticky graphite residue. I want my helmet to look old and worn like it sometimes is in the Mandalorian show. My favorite way to do so is to apply the black and brown oil paint in the corners and crevices. After brushing on the paint, you can wipe off some of it with a paper towel. I decided to also go in with light brown acrylic paint to make the spots more opaque. With that, the helmet looks muddy, which is what I was looking for. With the painting done, let's glue in the visor, which is a tinted grinding shield from Amazon. I made a paper template, added a border around it, and traced that shape on the visor. After cutting it out with scissors, I tacked it inside the helmet with hot glue and reinforced the connection with strips of flex tape. Finally, I hot glued upholstery foam inside the helmet to make it fit my head better. And with that, we're done! Here is the final result. It's definitely not perfect, but it was a good project to practice finishing and painting 3D printed parts. For those of you waiting for an EVA foam project, don't worry, as my next video will be one of those with a new template. And if you want to make your own Star Wars costume, visit my Etsy store and you might just find the right template for your project. Anyways, this is the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, you can leave a like and subscribe to my channel for more cool builds like this one. And I'll see you in my next video. Bye.